Today we're going to make fun of Sean. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. Been in the planning stages of this for, pretty much for the past year. Me and Mr. McNamara started speaking about a year ago. And I moved back to the East Coast from Southern California in March of 2020. Obviously we all know what happened in March of 2020. So we didn't have the opportunity to do it last year. But we finally got it on the books, and I'm here today. I live in Western Connecticut now, closer down by New York City, and I drove up last night. Spent the night at my good friend from Lincoln High School's house. He lives over in Cumberland, so it was good to see him and catch up with him, and then have the opportunity to come in here and speak with all of you today. And what I really want to touch on today is, I don't have a presentation. I don't have, a video to show you or a PowerPoint. Or I didn't write a book or a memoir. I'm just going to come share a little bit about my experience, strength and hope, and really where I came from, what happened, and where I'm at today. I grew up in Salesville. I went to Fairlawn, then I went to Salesville Elementary. I went to the middle school when it used to be attached to the high school up here. And then, like Mr. Orsini said, I came through Lincoln High School and I graduated in 2006. Some of you may recognize my last name. My mother was a sixth grade teacher at the middle school. Not sure if any of you had her, Mrs. McGowan. But, she cut her a break if you didn't like her back then. She was, she would walk into school every day fearful for about 10 years that she was going to get a call that her son was overdosed and dead. So luckily she can, sleep well tonight. And, for the foreseeable future, if I continue to do what I'm doing, because it's not a guarantee. I've been sober since March 17th, 2017, so St. Patrick's Day, no significance there. Had really no regard for what day it was when I went into treatment for the sixth time. And, I surrendered to drugs and alcohol on that day, and then soon after I surrendered to the process of recovery and bettering myself as a human being. But it took a lot of heartache, it took a lot of pain, it took a lot of fear, over, the course of a decade, really, of abusing and, manipulating and stealing and, living in like this isolated life that, I didn't really foresee it being an issue, but, really, living in self-centeredness or fear or selfishness, you don't really see how you can affect others. And if you have any family members that have struggled with drugs or alcohol, I'm sure that you know what it's like and the effect that a significant other or family member or friend can have on you. It's not that they want to put you as not a priority in their life, but they're suffering from a disease, and that disease is alcoholism. And, when you're in active addiction, there's really nothing else that can take precedent over, getting that next fix and getting high or getting drunk, whatever you prefer, really. So I, like Mr. Orsini was saying, I played a lot of sports here at Lincoln High School. I played basketball on this floor. I played soccer, golf, volleyball, all these different things. I had a lot of friends, and I grew up playing Lincoln Little League Baseball, went on the team to the Eastern Regionals. I did all of those things, and, I had purpose, I had identity, but deep down inside, I had a ton of insecurities about who I was. I didn't feel like I could necessarily fit in. I felt that, the next person was bigger, stronger, more athletic, smarter, more intelligent than I was, and I didn't know what I was missing. I had like some void deep down inside that I really didn't want to talk about, one, but really didn't know what the core root of it was, and I just ignored it for a very long time. And eventually, as we know, once we hold things inside for too long, they combust, right? Or we find some solution, whatever, could be positive, could be negative. For me, it was drugs and alcohol, and that was my solution for so long, because, I can sit here to say that like heroin and like Xanax and Oxycontin and alcohol were never my problem. It was like the best solution that I knew on how to cope with life. It was my coping mechanism. So in high school, I was exposed to, smoking pot. I think the first time I smoked pot was my sophomore year of high school. Then I started drinking alcohol, and I soon found out that I was the type of drinker or drug user that like just went 0 to 100. So I was a kid at the party that would like, be the most boisterous or, like bouncing around the party, but then I'd be like next to the toilet, or I'd be like having to be like dragged home to put into bed because I was just 0 to 100, right? There was no time for me to enjoy casually the drinking and stop at 2 or 3 or 4. It was either I didn't do it at all or I did it 110%. That was, and I knew that early on. And, graduating from Lincoln High School and then going off to college, and I see some seniors in here. Congratulations to anyone that's graduating this year and, has some hopes and dreams and aspirations of doing big things in life. That's what life's all about. And it's, it's about going into these new adventures and experiencing life and the uncomfortability that comes along with it. For me, when I graduated, I really felt that I lost a sense of identity. Right? And it's hard to see it and it's hard to realize it when you're going through it. And, I did the normal progression of graduating and then going off to college. And from there I'd get a job. And it's just like, that's just like what we're taught in school. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. Or you go to the military, you go right into trade school, or you go into the workforce. Like, you need to progress in life. And so I got accepted into college and I went off to college. And, what I learned real quickly was that my educational background in regards to drugs and alcohol was pretty limited compared to what I got exposed to my freshman year at college. I had not had any experience with cocaine, with ecstasy, with opiates, prescription pills, heroin, whatever, whatever is out there, I didn't know anything about. I had heard of these things, right? I had never experienced them. I had never seen anyone that had dived into that realm of severe, what I like to call severe drug use, right? Because, marijuana is socially acceptable and alcohol is as well. Deep down inside, alcohol is probably one of the worst things that you can possibly do for your body. So freshman year of college, like I was saying, a lot of that self-validation that I went through life looking for, like, oh, good job, Sean, you won the state championship. Oh, good job, Sean, like you made the high school team. Oh, good job, Sean, you like got an A. Like all those things is like what kept me, I guess, somewhat sane, and it gave me purpose, it gave me identity, and like I lived and breathed off validation from others. But deep down inside, I had a ton of insecurities, but I wouldn't allow anyone else to know that. No one would have known that, and I got to college and I felt lost. I felt like a lost little puppy in this, like, this new world that I knew nothing about, where I had to re-identify who I was. I had to find new friends. I had to find a new purpose because I no longer had athletics because I wasn't good enough to play in college. And then like I needed a new group of friends, and like just getting good grades like wasn't sufficient enough for me for purpose. Like that was just like whatever. I went to college just because that was what I was supposed to do. But like that wasn't going to re-identify who I was as a person. And so I felt kind of lost. And a lot of those insecurities came to the surface my freshman year. And where it all started for me was I walked into my dorm mate's room my freshman year, like about 2 months into school, and he was lamped up like playing FIFA, and he had like just broken his ankle playing intramural basketball, and he looked kind of out of it, right? He looked dazed, he looked confused, he looked like, but he was like enjoying life a little bit. And I was like, deep down inside, I'm like, I kind of want to know what that's like. What's going on there? And I was like, dude, what's going on, man? And he's like, no, I like broke my ankle and the doctor prescribed me painkillers. And I'm like, what's a painkiller? Like literally have no acknowledgement or education in terms of what anything about prescription pills were. I didn't know opioids was a derivative of heroin, the same ingredient. I didn't know there was physical withdrawals. I didn't know there was severe dependency. And if you, took them consistently for a long enough period of time, that you would eventually have some severe withdrawals and be sick. I didn't know anything about that. But at that point in time, I felt that I was open to new experiences and that I could handle it by myself, right? And I asked him, I said, what does it feel like? And, for him, he's like, hey, man, I'm just using it for the pain. And I'm like, I knew for me, like, no, I want to feel like what you feel like right now because I want to escape life. I don't want to feel what life is all about. And I can't cope with reality with what's going on right now. So he gave me one of those pills. I think it was a Percocet or a Vicodin. And 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later, whenever it kicked in, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. Like I have arrived finally, right? All of those doubts, all of those fears, all of those insecurities had subsided, right? I wasn't looking for validation anymore. This was now my new validation. This is what made me feel whole, right? And at that point in time, I had determined that I want to feel like this the rest of my life. You know, this is the best feeling I've ever felt. I have no anxiety. I have no depression. I have no social anxiety being around people I don't know. I don't feel like, this is my purpose, right? Like, I was just talking about, like, I need to find a new purpose and a new identity. This was it, because I didn't have to feel. This was my new solution and my coping mechanism. And for the next couple of years, I carried around this 100-pound gorilla on my back, which was drug addiction. And no one knew, my friends, my family, they didn't realize anything was going on with me until I went back my junior year. I was down at Clemson in South Carolina, and I had come back because I was a golf management major, so I was doing an internship in Rhode Island, and I went back down there, to see my buddies that I used to get high with. And I was excited, for another year of using and abusing. And I walked into my buddy's apartment after, summer break, and the first thing that I saw on the countertop when I walked in was a bag of hypodermic needles, syringes. And my immediate thought was disgust, disappointment, and then lastly, that's not me. I'll never do that, right? This is not something that I would ever indulge in. Like, I'm not some homeless drug addict that's living on the streets of Providence or wherever. Like, my life is not going to get to that. I'm a managing drug addict. I get through school. I get decent grades. I have a job. My family doesn't know what's going on. I'm doing pretty good from the outside. And I can tell you that within 2 weeks of that point in time, when I walked out of that apartment with disgust, I was in that very same apartment 2 weeks later with a belt around my arm, and my friend, so-called friend, shooting me up for the first time. And that same feeling that I got my freshman year of college came over me again, but now it was intensified. And now the impulsive behaviors of stealing, lying, manipulating, cheating, all of these things to get what I needed to get, or what I thought I needed to get. Within 2 weeks of that time period, I had not been to one class. I had sold every book that I had just purchased. I had used every dollar in my bank account. I had stole other books and sold books. I had stole other things from people that I lived with. And I reached the breaking point where I called my parents. I was 21 years old. And I called my parents and I said, I have a problem. Oh, Sean, you have a problem with what? What's going on? I'm like, I have a raging drug problem. And I've spent every dollar that's in my bank account, every dollar that you've given me for the entire year, and more. And so my parents were in shock. They were in denial, a little disappointment, but in complete fear of what was to come. And they called my primary care physician, and they said, hey, Sean's at college and he's struggling with drugs, opioids. What should we do? And the doctor suggested to my parents that they come down and they pick me up and they bring me into detox because, I needed to do a medical detox off the drugs that I was using. But he said, Sean's going to be sick because you have to drive from South Carolina to Rhode Island. You need to get him some money so he can get well. And I remember standing outside the ATM on the middle of Clemson's campus, and my dad was taking out $200 to give it to me, and I was shaking. And he was looking at me like I wasn't the same person, the same son that he had raised for the first 21 years of my life. And it was a low point for me. It was the first low point that I experienced. And I took that money, I don't even think I said thank you, ran off and got what I needed to feel better. The next day we drove back up to Rhode Island. I ran out of those drugs by the time we hit a service stop on the Jersey Turnpike. And my dad had no idea I was in the rest stop in the bathroom shooting up Oxycontin. And I went into Butler Hospital in East Providence, and this was what started my treatment history. And I remember sitting in that detox, and these people came in from AA, and they had this blue book, and they were talking about step 1, which says, like, hey, do you think your life's unmanageable because of drugs and alcohol? A little bit. Hey, do you think you're powerless over drugs and alcohol? Like once you pick up a drink or a drug, you think you can stop? And I'm like, oxys, not really. Alcohol I can control though. I'm just a drug addict. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't qualify to be here. I'm not part of AA, and I disqualified my own self. I left that detox with no solution. I just thought I had a physical obsession, right, of craving, right? That like as long as I remove that and my body is okay and I'm not physically dependent on drugs anymore, then that life will be okay. I can just insert myself back into society, and it was just a phase. And I think my parents probably thought the same thing. Within a couple weeks, I was getting high again. And I remember I was driving back from Providence on 146 to Lincoln, and I got a call from my mom, who had went into my bedroom and went into the nightstand and opened the shelf, and it was full of syringes, spoons, cotton swabs, a ton of drug, different paraphernalia. And that's when she finally realized that my son is seriously a drug addict. He's an intravenous drug user, and I don't know if there's anything that I can do to help him. And she said not to come home, and I didn't come home, and I crashed at a couple different friends' places until, anyone in their right mind who's not shooting up Oxycontin, that is your friends, doesn't really want you around if you're type of doing that stuff. So that didn't last too long. And I called my parents. I needed help again. I went back to Butler for the second time. I was like, all right, now I'll do outpatient programming after detox. Tried that for a few weeks. Couldn't do it. Started getting high again. And then finally, my grandmother kind of extended an olive branch to me, and she said, all right, I'm going to give you an opportunity here, because obviously you can't live with your parents anymore. She owned like some apartment complexes over in Pawtucket. Said, I'm going to give you like the top floor apartment for it was like $150 a month, and like you're going to go back to school and you're going to work, because my dad had got me a job. I said, all right, maybe I can do it. Couldn't do it. I never once paid her that $150. I lived there for 8 or 9 months. I actually would go to her assisted living and ask her for money to continually get high and manipulate her, saying, I got you Friday when I get paid. Promise, Grandma. Never would happen. Finally, my uncle who took care of the place locked me out of that place. And I would climb up the fire escape 5 floors to live in there because I had nowhere else to go. There was no heat going on. There was no electricity. There was no running water. They had shut it all off. And they locked me out. They changed the locks. I was able to do that for a few weeks, and then I've called my parents again. I need help for the third time. And so I went to McLean Hospital in Massachusetts for detox again. And they said, we need to do something a little different this time. So they sent me to Pennsylvania, and I did a 45-day program there. And my dad showed up about a week before I was about to leave and said, you're not coming back to Rhode Island. There's nothing left here for you. And I said, well, where do you expect me to go? I have nothing. I have nothing to my name. And he's like, you can go live with my brother and your aunt, and down in Maryland, because that's where he's from. There's a few stipulations. You got to go back to school. You have to get a job. You have to drug test once a week. And I said, okay, I can do that. I don't really have any other choice at that point in time. So I go down there and I live with them for a year and a half. What was cool, kind of, was that I would get drug tested once a week, but they didn't consider me an alcoholic. I soon found out that I was an alcoholic as well as a drug addict. I replaced the alcohol for the opiates, and for the next year and a half, Jameson became my best friend. And now I can accept the fact that not only am I a drug addict, but I'm an alcoholic, because I'm just replacing one thing for another, and I'm not taking a deeper look internally on why I'm doing this. What's the core root of the reason why I continue to use these substances to get out of my own way? I can't deal with myself. I can't cope with reality. I can't cope with life. This is like, these drugs and alcohol are my significant other. They're my best friend. And like, you remove those from me, I'm going to have like PTSD from that type of stuff. And I can't do it. I'm just going to lock myself down. And from there, and like, I don't want to sell myself short. I did graduate college in that period of time. I graduated from University of Maryland with a bachelor's in business and a minor in finance and all that kind of stuff, while getting drunk pretty much the whole entire time. I landed a job in Washington, D.C., working for Coca-Cola North America. I finally was moving out of my aunt and uncle's house, finally self-sufficient for the first time in my life. Had a place to live, had a job, had some friends down there, some positive friends. But now, the chains had been lifted, right? I had zero accountability of drug testing or not having a place to live. And the first thing I did was resort back to what I preferred. I like alcohol, but I love drugs. And I soon found some connections in the Baltimore area. Within 3 months, I was driving back from Baltimore after picking up quite a bit of drugs. And I'm driving on the highway, and I look in the rearview mirror, and there's 7 cop cars with their lights on. And usually when you have that many cop cars behind you, you're not just getting pulled over for a speeding ticket. So I got pretty much ripped out of the car because there had been numerous phone calls that I'd been swerving all over the road, hitting guardrails. I didn't even realize what I was doing. Essentially was driving around with a deadly weapon, the way I was driving my car. I got my first arrest. I mean, I'd been arrested before I was 18, but first arrest in being an adult. I got charged with DUI, felony possession of multiple narcotics. And at that point in time, I woke up the next morning. I spent the night in jail, and my uncle came and picked me up. The easiest thing for me to do was to go get high again because I didn't want to feel what was going on. I didn't want to deal with the reality of the situation, and I didn't know how to deal with the reality of the situation. I drove back up to Baltimore and spent the last little money I had to get high again. And then the court proceedings started to happen a little bit later. And they offered me probation before judgment, which means in Maryland, if you're good for a year, that they'll drop most of the charges. I still pled guilty to one of the misdemeanors. And for that next year, I was pretty good. I was pretty good. I had no solution, right? But I was just kind of white knuckling it. I had to go into the probation officer's office every week, and I had a drug test. And in that time, I reconnected with an old friend who turned into be my girlfriend for 4.5 years. She's not from Lincoln, but around here. And never thought that I owed it to her to tell her that I was a drug addict and that I've been to treatment 3 times. Never did I think that she was deserving of that information because you know what? I couldn't accept the fact that I knew I was a drug addict, right? It's just a phase of my life. And we dated for 4.5 years, and I continued to work at Coca-Cola North America, and I finished that probation before judgment program, and I walked out of that probation officer's office that last day I took my drug test. What's the first thing I did? I went and got high. But now things have changed. I could no longer have access to Oxycontin or prescription pills. Things had gotten more difficult to get those. They became more expensive. And heroin was the next best thing. It's the same exact thing, essentially, and cheaper and more available. So now I became a full-blown heroin addict and Xanax user and alcoholic when I needed it. And I was the guy who would pull up to the Coca-Cola corporate office and slacks and a button down and nice shoes, shooting up in the parking lot, walking inside and looking down at my desk, and I had a blood stain in my armpit from shooting up in the parking lot. But I didn't think anything was wrong with that. I'm still showing up, still getting my work done, right? But it's hard to see what other people are seeing when you're sick and when you're not talking about it. And so time went on. I continued to date this girl. My disease of addiction started to progress even more. It became no longer fun, because then it was the fun with problems. And then literally for the last few years of my addiction, it was just problems all the time. I was hiding from this lie to that lie, covering up a lie that I forgot I even told. I mean, it's just no way to live. I was imprisoned by my addiction, and I didn't know there was a way out. And finally, that good job that I had said, see you later. Here's some money. Take a hike, essentially. And I said, okay, thank you for the check. Not to mention I had just stolen about $30,000 from them because I used to run their corporate American Express card, and I would buy these tickets like I was buying them for customers, and I'd just resell them on StubHub. And then they wrote me a check to leave. then I spent most of that in the next month and a half. And so now I had no job. I had no purpose at all. I'm still living in DC. And like in my head, everything is fine. You know, you just lost the best employee that you had. You know, I killed it for you guys, blah, blah, blah. Like all in resentment, all in judgment, all opinionated. But I wasn't able to own my side of the street and my stuff. I wasn't willing to admit that I had a problem still yet. And so finally, the girlfriend said, she lived up this way. She said, you need to come up this weekend. This was like August of 2016. And, you know, she had like her cousin's wedding, and then like she had like some big employee appreciation party that she wanted me to go to. And I was deep into my addiction at that point in time. I was between 125 and 130 pounds. I had a 2-gram heroin habit a day with 10 milligrams of Xanax. I was basically a zombie of a human being. I was ineffective of being present-minded for anyone. I don't know what this girl saw in me, but... So I went up there, went to the wedding, went to this party. I guess I was outside talking with some like maintenance people, which what I thought was about 15 minutes, but I guess it was like 2 or 3 hours. Walk back inside, she's nowhere to be found, and she lived in the complex, the condominium complex where this, you know, gathering was. And her friend, you know, kind of gave me a stern look and said to go back to her condo, and I said, okay. And I walked back there, and I walked in there, and you have to understand that this girl was innocent. She didn't know I was a drug addict. She'd never even done drugs in her life. She drinks wine every once in a while. She's never been exposed to anything like this. And I walk into her apartment, and on the kitchen table is just a buffet of everything that I had. And I'm talking syringes loaded with heroin, bags of syringes, bags of heroin, bottles of Xanax, Adderall, Suboxone, spoons. I mean, the whole gamut was laid out there for me. And you know what the disease told me at that point in time? It said, disregard the traumatic event that you just put this woman through that you so-called love, right? Don't worry about her feelings. What am I going to do to get this back? Because that's my wife and that's my girlfriend. The drugs are what's more important to me. And that, to me, I look back on that, and it just shows you the depths of where addiction can take you. The disease tells you that you need to isolate. The disease tells you that, like, you deserve this, and that you rationalize and justify every decision in your life to get what you need, with complete disregard for anyone that ever meant anything to you. And I sat down with her, and I tried to manipulate my way out of the situation, said it's not that bad, that I had a little slip. A 3-year slip. And she ended up throwing all of that stuff away. I was extremely physically sick at her place for the next 24 hours until she brought me to Logan Airport. And I flew back to Baltimore, Washington Airport, where I had a drug dealer waiting at the airport that I paid money for him to be waiting there. And for the next month and a half, I went into a deep, dark spiral. I mean, I basically... I think we're dying here. Is it? All right, now I'll just project. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right. So for the next month and a half, I returned to Washington, D.C., and I was living in this house with 2 other guys that I went to college with. And I didn't leave my room, and I shared about this in the other 3 periods. And I think this is important, and it's vulnerable for me to say, but I would take like Gatorade or water bottles and empty them out, and I would literally use them to urinate in because I was that afraid of human interaction at that point in time. I was in that much fear of walking outside of my room and seeing someone see me the way I was. I was broken. I was demoralized. I was a shell of a human being, ridden with fear and anxiety and depression. I mean, you name it. Like I was at the point where, like, if I overdosed and died, I'd be okay with it. You know, I really would. Like, what are you taking? I don't really got anything right now. It's all good. And a month and a half later, I'm sitting at the edge of my bed after just shooting up, and my mom called me like 20 times in a row. And my first instinct was to ignore, run away from this. This is not what I want to be dealing with right now. And I finally answered. I felt, some kind of point of surrender where I was like, you know what? Like, I'm just such in a deep, dark place right now that, like, what is this going to hurt to answer the phone? And that ex-girlfriend went over to my parents and intervened and said, your son's a drug addict. And my parents are like, yeah, we know. Well, he's using again and he's going to kill himself. Because I saw him, a month ago and he's on the verge of death. And my mom started crying. She started crying. My brother was there. I started crying, not because of like the cat was out of the bag type stuff. Like, I didn't care about that. It was more or less like I was so deathly afraid of the physical aspect and withdrawals and detox of what I had to go through in the coming days, coming off the amount that I was using, that I just broke down. And I said, I'll go. And that girlfriend saved my life, because if she didn't intervene with my parents at that point in time, I had 60 days to activate or, retroactive the health insurance that I had from my job. And this was the 59th day. So if it was 24 more hours, I would have had no health insurance. I would have had no resources to get the help that I needed. So I don't know what the specific reason is on why. Someone was looking out for me, because I wasn't looking out for myself, that's for sure. And they found me a bed to go to in New Jersey at this treatment facility. My dad was going to drive down and pick me up the next day, because they didn't have a bed till 7 p.m. So I had about 24 hours before I had to go into treatment. So I'm like, great. I get a full day to do whatever I want. I woke up the next morning at like 6 a.m., drove to West Baltimore, picked up as much drugs as I could, got as high as I could, driving out of West Baltimore. I'm at a red light, ready to get on the highway, and I fall asleep. Foot on the brake, head on the steering wheel, the whole thing. And I wake up, someone beeping at me. I look back, and it's a state trooper in an SUV. And so the light turns green. I pull onto the highway, and he immediately lights me up. I'm like, oh, great, here we go again. And he walked up to the car, asked me for my license and registration. He said, why I pulled you over? But why I'm pulling you over? I said, I have no idea. I'm just tired. I'm returning home. Whatever manipulative excuse that I had. And he said, you missed 7 light interchanges back there, and I just watched you. I'm like, no recollection of that. He takes my license and registration, goes back to his vehicle and checks it, comes back, and he says, Mr. McGowan, he goes, you haven't had a valid license in over a year. Your registration's been suspended. I don't even ask you if you have car insurance, but the bottom line is I can't let you drive this car home. I said, okay. He goes, and I'm going to need to search the vehicle before I go. And at this point in time, I got like sweatpants on with burn holes in them from cigarettes. I'm literally 125 pounds. I have all the drugs just in the front seat of my car with a shirt over it. So I was just like, whatever. Like, at this point, just take me to jail, bring me to the hospital, put me in treatment. Really doesn't matter where I go. And he gave me an opportunity, and I don't know where this comes through either. Someone's looking out for me, for sure. But he said, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to gather your things. And I'm like, what? Like, this doesn't normally happen to me. And he walked back to his car, and all the illegal things I had in my car, I put in this little knapsack type thing I had. And he came back, and I got out of the car. He searched the car, didn't find anything. And he towed my car, and I took an Uber, and I picked up my car, and then I went to treatment that day. I had 2 seizures in that detox. I woke up 2 different occasions, waking up, falling out of my bed, and going into a straight seizure for over a minute from the Xanax withdrawal. And then I continued on to treatment for the next 45, 50 days. I can't remember exactly how long it was. But never in my life had I ever had 60 days sober, ever, never. And all the attempts that I had, that was like my breaking point. And I remember getting a call from my parents, because now we're in like November, late November, Thanksgiving. I spent Thanksgiving in treatment. I was actually in treatment for my 10-year graduation party, or whatever, 10-year rehearsal, or whatever it is. My parents are like, no, you're not coming home, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, it's about Christmas time. I'm trying to find every excuse to not continue on to treatment for a long time, because my parents' idea was to send me out to Southern California, because it worked for my cousin 4 years before. It's like a 6-month program for men. And I was like, listen, Mom, I got A, B, C, D, E, F, all these things I got to do before I go out there. When in reality, I had nothing going on, literally nothing going on. And so I finally grinded my mom down to nothing until she said, all right, you can come home for Christmas, but then you're going right out there after Christmas. I didn't get sober till March. So I spent the next few months ripping and running. I ended up living at my dad's house. He was living in Pennsylvania temporarily. And finally, my parents came together and said, listen, you're leaving on this date. You're not staying. We're not enabling you to do this anymore. We can't make you sober. I don't know, maybe they went to an Al-Anon meeting or something. And I was like, all right, I'm willing to do it, but on my terms, right? I need you to fly me out to California. I got to make sure this is a suitable environment for me to get sober. If I'm finally ready to do this, I need to bring my car out there. I had all these stipulations, right? My parents were just trying to save my life. My mom flew me out to California. It was a Super Bowl weekend when the Patriots beat the Falcons that year, and they came back and won. I was out there getting high. My cousin was 4 years sober at the time, and I think my parents just thought, hey, maybe he'll go out there, see that it's great, see that he's doing well, and just stay. That didn't happen. I had more work to do. I had some more research and development to do in the drug addiction department. And I came back, got high immediately for the next few weeks, and then finally my parents came together again and said, all right, you're leaving on this date. We booked you a hotel in Chicago, Lincoln, Nebraska, stay with your brother in Utah, Vegas, and then get to California and go to treatment. I said, okay. And my 19, 20-year-old sister at the time volunteers to drive with me. I'm like, great. I'm like, I can get high the whole way out there. My sister will drive me. It's going to be great. We're slated to leave on a Monday. And so I drive into Baltimore, West Baltimore. I was meeting my drug dealer, and he's got a minivan with gold teeth, usually had his kids in the back. And he's like, Sean, and I was buying a decent amount because I was about to drive across the country. He's like, be careful with this stuff. A lot of people are falling out, which means overdosing, right? And I'm like, I'm invincible. Never been Narcaned in my life. Never overdosed. Never been hospitalized. I'm untouchable. My body just doesn't respond like other people respond. And I remember buying it, driving to the other side of the parking lot, loading everything up. I had no veins in my arm anymore. The only thing I could use was in my hand. And I remember this woman, she was sweeping the parking lot, the McDonald's parking lot, and we were staring at each other and just she's looking at me in disgust because she knows what I'm doing. I'm looking at her in disgust because I'm like, you work at McDonald's in West Baltimore in the ghetto, sweeping the parking lot. That's where my self-centeredness and this disease lies in me, because all I do is want to judge everyone, right? Because I'm the one that's right. And all it did was get me in trouble my whole entire life. And I remember loading it up, shooting it up in my hand right here, and instantly there was this white flash that came over me. And I was like, this is it. I was like, I guess this is what it's like to overdose, right? My mom's finally going to get that call at Lincoln Middle School saying, hey, we found your son dead in his beat-up Honda Accord in West Baltimore McDonald's parking lot. That was it. That was the story, Drug addict, died, like a lot of my friends have. A lot of people I played basketball in this very gym are not alive anymore. They died from this disease. A lot. Went to way too many wakes and way too many funerals, and now I work in the industry of helping people, and I hear it all the time. I've gotten 2 texts since I've been here today of mothers, their kids relapsed, and she doesn't know what to do, and her other son is in the hospital. All day long, every day. It's just a constant thing. But I get to be present for those things today. And so I'm in my car, and I think I'm overdosing, and I think my life is over, and I've already accepted that a long time ago that could happen. Come to find out, I wasn't even sold heroin that day. I was sold ketamine. If anyone knows what ketamine is, it's a horse tranquilizer. And I shot ketamine in my hand, and I went into a severe K-hole, which is essentially it feels like things are closing in on you. It's just not a cool feeling. Not something I like. And I came out of that because it's very short-lived, only lasts about 15 minutes. And for the first time in my life, I could see myself looking at myself like someone was holding a mirror to me, because I was too afraid to ever look in the mirror. And I was holding that up to myself, And that's where I surrendered to the fact that I was done. That was it. I couldn't do it anymore. Every being inside of me said, Sean, like, there's nothing left out there for you, right? It's not fun anymore. Like, there's, like, it's just like, this is not who you were raised to be. This is not your purpose on life. Like, you have a greater purpose. You just can't see it yet. But if you get sober, maybe you can see it. And I walked over to that dumpster, and I threw out everything that I had, and I drove home when I could have simply drove somewhere else to get drugs. And I drove across the country with my sister. I remember our first stop the first night. I was laying in the bathroom, hugged around the toilet at this Marriott hotel in downtown Chicago, and my young sister, who had never seen me like this, felt helpless. I was throwing up, I couldn't move, zero energy. And she came back and she had like a Shake Shack hamburger and a milkshake because she thought that would make me feel better. And we got to Park City, Utah, where my brother lives, and my disease was telling me, Sean, you can do it one more time. One more time, you got this. You won't die. You got one more high left in you. So I had a vulnerable moment. And I drove down to downtown Salt Lake City, and I pulled up to this gas station, because there was a park across the street, and I Googled, right, like, where do you buy drugs in downtown Salt Lake City? And they said this park with a bunch of homeless people. I was like, that sounds good. So I pulled in this gas station, and I see these three guys, look like they've been homeless for a while. They had the brown paper bags. They had the whole stereotypical image that you think of in your head of a homeless drug addict or alcoholic. And I was like, I can make a decision right here and right now to be with them, or I can make a decision to drive back up there and try to change my life. And it wasn't me that made that decision. I can promise you that. I had some sort of divine intervention that, literally turned my hand, turned that key, put it in reverse, and drove back home that day. And I went into treatment, and I stayed in treatment for 6 months. And I remember waking up, I had like 65 days of sobriety, and I called my cousin, who at the time had like 3 or 4 years in the program, and he lived out there. He's helped me tremendously. And I said, man, I'm miserable right now, dude. I'm like, why am I so miserable? I'm like 65 days sober. I'm not shooting dope anymore. I'm not drinking. Like, aren't you just supposed to be happy? And he's like, well, what are you doing to like improve yourself, man? Like, what measures have you taken over the past 65 days to figure out who you are to better you? You can't just sit in sobriety. Like, that doesn't work that way. Simply being abstinent from drugs and alcohol is not going to make you a better person. Makes you present-minded so that you can take action to become a better person. And I said, all right, well, what do I need to do? Because I don't want to shoot dope again. I don't want to drink again, but I don't want to feel like this anymore. Like, I don't. Like, if this is what sobriety is all about, then I don't know. Maybe I just don't even want to be here anymore type stuff. And he said, come to this meeting tonight. And I went to this meeting in Laguna Beach, California. There's 120 guys, and I walked down to the basement of this hospital, and guys were laughing, and they were smiling, and they were talking, and they were having good conversation, and I couldn't relate. I was like, I'm miserable. My brain is insane right now. I feel more crazy and psychotic than I did when I was shooting heroin, and I'm 65 days sober. And he said, come take a seat. And I sat down. He said, introduce yourself to the group. I raised my hand during that meeting, and I said, I'm Sean. I'm a drug addict. I'm an alcoholic, and I don't know how to live life without drugs and alcohol. No idea. I need some help. And from that point on is when I surrendered to the process of recovery, and I surrendered to giving my will up to something greater than myself that I could start to change, because I knew I couldn't do it on my own anymore. I was self-reliant and self-willed myself through so many situations that I had finally realized that I needed to get honest. I needed to get open-minded. I needed to have some willingness to take some action. I needed to show some vulnerabilities, right? And I was told early in recovery, it's like, vulnerability is not weakness. Surrender is not losing, right? And getting uncomfortable breeds change. And that was something that stuck with me for the past 4+ years. It's like, Sean, when you admit defeat, you find relief. And I finally did that. I was like, I'm done, man. Like, put up all the white flags. There's nothing. I got nothing left out there in that world anymore. I got zero energy for it. I just want to be happy. I want to be peaceful, and I want to be serene, and I want to be a good human being, right? Because that's what this is all about. I haven't touched drugs or alcohol in over 4 years, and my goal every day when I wake up today is to become a better human being. And how can I be of service to someone that's struggling, whether it's with drugs and alcohol, whether it's with mental health, whether it's with anything, right? And you guys have been thrown in the mix of COVID over the past year, and isolation is a thing. Being alone is a thing. And it stems a lot of feelings of fear and anxiety and depression and trauma. Like, COVID is a traumatic event for a lot of people, especially people in high school, young people you're still trying to figure yourself out. And I feel that because I had a tough time in COVID. The worst thing you can do for a drug addict or an alcoholic is isolate them. The worst thing you can do for suffering with someone for mental health, underlying condition, is isolate them. Because it just breeds and it festers inside of you, and you're like, the only thing you're relying on is your self-will to try to get through it, and it just makes it worse. And what I do today and what my life is like today is completely different, right? If you would have put a picture of me up right here, 4 years ago, or if you would have asked me on March 18th of 2017, that, hey, man, you're going to be speaking at Lincoln High School in 2021 about your experience, strength, and hope, I said, you're crazy. It's not for me. I couldn't even talk the first 6 months. Couldn't even formulate sentences. Couldn't even comprehend things. My brain was in such a fog, I couldn't even see. Benzo withdrawals, everything is blurred. For 6 months, I was like that. I couldn't even work. And I volunteered at a YMCA the first 3 months of my sobriety, helping underprivileged kids, because my sponsor was like, hey, man, I don't know what you've been doing for 10 years, but you don't even know what the word gratitude really means. You have zero appreciation for life, like zero, more than anyone I've ever seen. I was like, before we even start doing work, I was like, you need to go out there into society and you have to understand what gratitude is all about, and that you have a lot of things that people don't. And that, like, helping someone else is where you're truly going to find purpose. So I did that for the first 3 months before I ever started to go back to work or do any of that kind of stuff. And it was an eye-opening experience for me. It brought back reality of like, hey, man, it's not all about you anymore, right? There's such a bigger purpose to like being here on planet Earth. And a lot of you seniors that are leaving here and going out into the world, you're going to be presented in different situations that are going to be uncomfortable. And it's hard to see it right now. You can try to see it, and you can try to play the tape through. All right, I go to college. I don't know anyone. I'm going to be presented in these opportunities. What am I going to do? You don't know until you're actually in it. And there's going to be some decisions that you might make that might affect you the rest of your life. Truly. Because it did for me. I lost a lot of things that I'll never get back as a result of putting drugs and alcohol as a priority in my life. I lost relationships that I can't rectify today. I did my best with the ones that I could change, but some of them were irreversible. Some of the damage that I had done, I couldn't come back from. And that's okay, but I made peace with that, and I'm okay with that. I did my part. And all I can do is control what I can control. I can't control what other people think of me. I can't control what other people's judgments or opinions are in my past. I can accept who I am today, and I can love me for who I am today, because I came in and I didn't love myself. I hated myself. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. Then my sponsor said, after you brush your teeth in the morning, I want you to look in the mirror and call yourself a winner, because for a long time I felt like a loser, and that was very difficult for me to do. And it was hard for me to get honest with another human being because I got trust issues. I think everyone's out to get me. I think everyone's out to manipulate me, because that's the delusion that I lived in for 10 years. But you don't know until you take a risk and put yourself out there. Show those vulnerabilities. If you don't feel comfortable talking to your parents or your peers, go to someone you don't even know. and share those things. It's just about getting them out. It's not about who you're sharing them with. Because sometimes the clouded lens that we see for ourselves is delusion. And like what you guys see of me right now and what I think I'm saying could be completely different. I have no idea. You know? But what I can say is that there's always going to be hope. And I was given a lot more than 2 chances, that's for sure. All the things I've done in my life, all the risks I've taken, all the dangerous situations that I've put myself in, I shouldn't be standing here today. But I was given a second chance, and I've done everything 24 hours at a time over the past 4 years to better who I am today. And I'm okay with Sean today. You know, I could love myself today, but for a long time I couldn't. I had to allow other people to love me so I could love myself again. And if any of you feel that way, that there's no hope or there's no way out, or that you feel isolated, that that the walls are just closing in on you, you know, grab someone's hand and talk to them about it. Because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to find a coping mechanism, whether it's drugs or alcohol, whether it's whatever vice out there, gambling, you know, shopping, I don't care. I mean, there's a million different things. Eventually you're going to find something that relieves you of whatever you've been bottling up inside. It doesn't just dissipate. We just suppress things, especially with drugs and alcohol. All those things that I had done for 10 years, they all came to the surface when I got sober, and I got hit like a brick wall, right? Because all I did was suppress those things. When I thought I was, you know, kind of dealing with them, when I was getting high, all I was doing was just pushing them down. And then you immediately get sober, and it's like, whoa, like everything comes back. You know, and that's why you see a lot of people relapse. If anyone has any, you know, friends or family that struggle with substance abuse, relapse rate is high. It's a reality, you know, and a lot of people have difficult time in the first 90 days because they don't like to cope with emotions or feelings, or they don't know how. And it becomes overwhelming. And like the mental health underlying condition comes out, and then the only thing they know how to deal with the anxiety or the depression or the trauma is to use drugs or alcohol. So I want, if anyone has a question for me, you know, I truly appreciate all of you allowing me to come speak with you today. Even if, you know, no one, it didn't resonate with anyone or it didn't help anyone, you guys helped me stay sober for another day for sure, 100%. But I promise you there's no question that makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm pretty much an open book when it comes to this kind of stuff. If you don't feel comfortable sharing in a group or asking me a question, that's okay. You can come talk to me individually. But again, thank you again to my guys over here. This was the dream team when I was here. Same exact crew. So you guys are lucky, and you have an opportunity to do whatever you want to do in your life, right? I have the power of choice today to never revert back to that life that I lived. If I do the things that I were taught, you know? And all of you have, you know, the opportunity to become the best people. But don't get distracted by other influences. Don't get distracted by, you know, peer pressure. Like, I don't, you know, that term's real, right? But like, really take an in-depth look, like when you graduate high school, I'm talking post-high school, of who you're surrounding yourself with, right? And what are their motives for being your friend? Are they taking advantage of you? Do they want to make themselves feel better for the actions that they're doing on a daily basis? That stuff's important. And I wish everyone well. I hope the graduating class, you guys aspire to do all the things that you want to do in life and be the people, you know, that you hoped and dreamed of as a kid. But yeah, that's all I got. I appreciate everyone for allowing me to come here and share. If anyone has a question, I'd be, you know, happy to address it, answer it, anything.